"You want to build a what?" was the typical response, followed by a long silence and a hesitant, "For your mailbox?" "A Big Ben mailbox, huh?" he said, stroking his beard. "Never done one of those before. Usually it's just fences, gates, that sort of thing." "This is a bit different," I admitted. Living in the suburbs, you'd think package delivery would be straightforward. Leave it on the porch, ring the bell, done. But in my little corner of supposed paradise, known as Harmony Heights, even receiving a package had become an Olympic sport. I'm an online shopper, I admit it. Nothing extravagant, just the occasional book, some household supplies, and yes, okay, maybe a few impulse purchases from late-night infomercials. But the delivery drivers in our area seemed to have a personal vendetta against actually delivering anything. They'd leave packages precariously balanced on the porch railing, hidden behind bushes, where they'd inevitably get rained on. Or, most frustratingly, they'd simply slap a "sorry we missed you" slip on the door and drive away, even when I was home. So I decided to solve the problem. I installed a larger-than-normal mailbox. Not one of those ridiculous novelty mailboxes shaped like a fish or a barn, just a simple, rectangular box, big enough to accommodate most packages. It was black, unobtrusive, and, in my opinion, perfectly reasonable. It wasn't about making a statement. It was about convenience. I was tired of playing hide-and-seek with delivery drivers, tired of finding those "sorry we missed you" slips on my door. A slightly larger mailbox seemed like a logical solution. Apparently, in Harmony Heights, logic was a violation of HOA policy, I thought. As I admired my newly installed mailbox, imagining all the packages that would now be safely delivered, instead of languishing in some distant distribution center. I should have known that any deviation from the prescribed dimensions of suburban existence would attract the attention of the neighborhood's resident enforcer of conformity. I just didn't realize how quickly or how absurdly that attention would manifest. The knock on the door was sharp, insistent, and utterly lacking in any hint of neighborly warmth. It was the knock of a man on a mission, a man with a clipboard, a man who probably alphabetized his spices and measured his grass with a ruler, Harold Harry Fitzpatrick. The kind of man who ironed his socks and considered beige the only acceptable color for, well, anything. He treated the HOA like his personal fiefdom, and the bylaws like holy scripture. He was, to put it mildly, a pain in the neck. He stood on my porch, a monument to suburban rigidity, his golf shirt tucked neatly into his khaki slacks, his expression a mixture of disapproval and smug self-satisfaction. "Mr. Carter," he began, his voice a dry, nasal drone, "I'm afraid I must address a matter of grave concern." He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. "Your mailbox." "My mailbox?" I replied, feigning innocence. "What about it?" "It's excessive," he declared, his eyes narrowing. "It's unsightly. It simply does not conform to the uniform aesthetics of our community." He said uniform aesthetics, as if Harmony Heights were some kind of architectural masterpiece, rather than a collection of nearly identical houses. "It's an affront to suburban order." I glanced at my mailbox. It was, admittedly, larger than the standard model, but hardly monstrous. "It's just big enough to fit packages, Harry," I explained. "So the delivery drivers don't have to leave them on the porch." "Packages should be delivered to the door, Mr. Carter," he retorted, his lips pursing, "not crammed into some oversized receptacle." He pointed to Mrs. Gable's novelty lighthouse mailbox. Now that is a mailbox, nautical-themed and appropriately sized. I resisted pointing out that the lighthouse was twice the height of my mailbox. Harry, predictably, didn't just complain to me directly. He filed a formal complaint with the HOA, citing some obscure bylaw about mailbox uniformity and maintaining the community's aesthetic integrity. I received the official letter a few days later, a crisp white envelope containing a sternly worded warning and a threat of escalating fines. The letter demanded that I replace my excessive mailbox with an HOA-approved standard model within 14 days. It was signed, in a meticulously neat cursive script, by Harold Fitzpatrick, President, Harmony Heights Homeowners Association. The sheer absurdity of it all was almost comical. Was a slightly larger mailbox really such a threat to the peace and tranquility of Harmony Heights? Were these people serious? Did they really have nothing better to do than measure mailboxes and enforce beige conformity? I thought, my internal monologue growing increasingly sarcastic. I tried to reason with Harry. I explained again the practical reasons for the larger mailbox. I pointed out that it was, in fact, quite unobtrusive, that it blended in with the landscaping, that it was, if anything, an improvement over the rusty, dented mailbox it had replaced. But it was no use. Harry Fitzpatrick was not interested in reason, in logic, or in the concept of convenience. He was interested in rules, in regulations, and in enforcing his narrow vision of suburban perfection upon everyone within his reach. "The rules are the rules, Mr. Carter," he said, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "And the rules clearly state that all mailboxes must conform to the HOA-approved standard model. Your mailbox does not." He said "does not," with a finality that suggested the matter was closed, the debate over, the judgment rendered. My mailbox, it seemed, was guilty of the crime of being too big. I stood in my front yard, staring at the offending mailbox, the HOA's threatening letter clutched in my hand. I could comply, of course. I could replace my perfectly functional, slightly larger mailbox with a standard HOA-approved model, surrender to Harry Fitzpatrick's demands, and return my front yard to a state of bland conformity. But something inside me rebelled. This wasn't just about a mailbox. It was about principle. It was about the right to choose my own home decor, to prioritize practicality over aesthetics without being harassed by a power-hungry, aesthetically challenged tyrant. If Harry and the HOA were so obsessed with aesthetics, with uniformity, with control, then I'd give them something they couldn't control. I'd give them the opposite of standard. I'd give them Big Ben, I thought, a new idea, bold and wonderfully ridiculous, beginning to take shape in my mind. A replica of Big Ben, a miniature yet still imposing version of the iconic London clock tower, functioning as my mailbox. It was decorative, wasn't it? It was technically a mailbox. I'd make sure to include a functional slot for mail. And it was, without a doubt, the most gloriously inappropriate response to Harry Fitzpatrick's demand for uniformity that I could possibly imagine. It would be a statement, a declaration of independence, a giant ticking middle finger to the HOA's obsession with bland conformity. "Harold Fitzpatrick, you want a war on mailboxes? You've got one. Prepare to be time-stamped into submission," I declared internally, a surge of defiant energy coursing through me. It was time to escalate. It was time to fight back. It was time to build a Big Ben mailbox. My transformation from mild-mannered homeowner to Big Ben mailbox architect began, as all great and slightly insane projects do, with the internet. I needed to immerse myself in the world of Victorian Gothic architecture to understand the intricacies of clock tower design, to channel the spirit of Augustus Pugin, the architect of the real Big Ben, as I soon learned. My browser history went from oversized mailbox options to Big Ben blueprints and where to buy miniature clock faces in record time. I chuckled as I scrolled through pages of historical documents, architectural drawings, and surprisingly detailed analyses of Big Ben's construction. I learned about the clock tower's height, 316 feet, in case you're wondering. Its weight, approximately 8,667 tons, and the materials used in its construction: brick, limestone, and a whole lot of Victorian engineering. I studied the details of the clock faces, the ornate carvings, and the iconic spire that topped the structure. Of course, I wasn't planning to build a full-sized replica. That would be excessive, even for me. I needed a scaled-down version, something that would be imposing, yet still somewhat fit within the confines of my suburban front yard. I started sketching out my plans, filling notebooks with drawings of clock towers, clock faces, and various decorative flourishes. My initial, vague notion of a Big Ben mailbox was rapidly evolving into something far more elaborate, far more detailed, far more ridiculous. A mischievous grin spread across my face as I refined my designs. This wasn't just about replacing a mailbox. It was about creating a statement, a monument to petty revenge, a giant, ticking middle finger to the HOA's obsession with conformity. Building a miniature Big Ben, I quickly realized, was not a DIY project. I needed a professional. I needed someone with experience in metalwork, woodworking, and ideally, a healthy disregard for conventional suburban aesthetics. I started searching for local fabricators, companies that specialized in custom-made structures and architectural details. Most of the businesses I contacted were understandably bewildered by my request. "You want to build a what?" was the typical response, followed by a long silence and a hesitant, "For your mailbox?" But finally I found a company, Custom Creations, that seemed intrigued by the challenge. The owner, a man named Bob, a fourth Bob, was a grizzled artisan with a passion for unusual projects and a surprisingly extensive knowledge of Victorian architecture. "A Big Ben mailbox, huh?" he said, stroking his beard. "Never done one of those before. Usually it's just fences, gates, that sort of thing." "This is a bit different," I admitted. "Different is good," Bob said with a grin. "Different is interesting. And frankly, after 20 years of building boring metal railings, I'm ready for something interesting." I explained my situation, the HOA, the mailbox dispute, and my burning desire for revenge. Bob listened patiently, nodding occasionally, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "So, you want to make a statement?" he asked. "I want to make a statement that can be seen from space," I replied. He laughed. "I think we can handle that." We spent the next hour discussing the details, the dimensions, the materials, the clock faces, the chimes. Bob, it turned out, was a surprisingly enthusiastic collaborator, offering suggestions, sketching out ideas, and generally embracing the absurdity of the project. He even, to my delight, suggested adding a small, hidden compartment inside the clock tower, perfect for storing, well, whatever I wanted to store in my miniature Big Ben. The fabrication of the Big Ben mailbox took place off-site, at Bob's workshop. A process I imagined involved a lot of welding, hammering, and general metal-bending magic. I received periodic updates from Bob, photos of the work in progress, and assurances that my architectural masterpiece was coming along nicely. The delivery day, however, was a spectacle in itself. A flatbed truck carrying a massive tarp-covered object arrived at my house, attracting the attention of the entire neighborhood. The neighbors, as always, were watching. They gathered on their lawns, whispering to each other, pointing and staring. It took a crane, a team of workers, and a whole lot of careful maneuvering to lift the Big Ben replica from the truck and position it in my front yard, replacing the now removed, oversized mailbox that had started this whole saga. The sheer scale of the project was astounding. The miniature clock tower, while certainly smaller than the real Big Ben, was still impressively large, dominating my front yard and casting a long, imposing shadow over the street. It was a statement piece, a monument to defiance, and a giant, ticking middle finger to the HOA. The neighbors' reactions were a mixture of curiosity, amusement, and, in some cases, mild alarm. Children pointed and gasped, dogs barked, and even the teenagers, normally glued to their phones, seemed impressed. Harry Fitzpatrick, of course, was not amused. He stood across the street, his arms crossed, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. He'd make frantic phone calls, presumably to the HOA, to the city, to anyone who might be able to stop the madness unfolding before his very eyes. I, meanwhile, maintained my usual facade of innocent unconcern. I'd wave cheerfully to the neighbors, offer them refreshments, and explain that I was simply replacing my mailbox, upgrading my home's curb appeal, and embracing a more historical aesthetic. I made sure to repeatedly and loudly refer to it as my new mailbox. With the Big Ben replica in place, it was time for the finishing touches, the details that would elevate my mailbox from merely impressive to absolutely, gloriously over the top. The clock faces, custom-made and surprisingly accurate, were installed, their hands ticking away, marking the passage of time, and, I hoped, counting down the minutes until Harry Fitzpatrick's complete and utter meltdown. The golden-brown paint, carefully chosen to match the real Big Ben, gleamed in the sunlight, adding a touch of faux historical authenticity. And, of course, there was the mailbox slot. A small, discreet opening at the base of the tower, perfectly sized for letters and small packages. It was, after all, still a mailbox, albeit one disguised as a national landmark. But the pièce de résistance, the detail that truly transformed the project into a masterpiece of petty revenge, was the sound system. I installed a high-quality speaker system inside the clock tower, connected to a digital audio player programmed to play the iconic Big Ben chimes every hour, on the hour. It was magnificent, it was ridiculous, it was perfect. And it was all completely 100% HOA loophole exploiting, as far as I could tell, I thought, as I tested the system, the familiar Westminster quarters echoing through the quiet suburban streets of Harmony Heights. It was the final, glorious touch, the cherry on top of my Big Ben mailbox sundae. And I couldn't wait to see Harry Fitzpatrick's reaction. The unveiling of my Big Ben mailbox was a moment I'd been eagerly anticipating, and Harry Fitzpatrick's reaction did not disappoint. It was a meltdown of epic proportions, a Karen-esque explosion of rage and disbelief that would forever be etched in the annals of suburban legend. I'd timed it perfectly, ensuring that Harry would be taking his usual morning power walk past my house just as the final touches were being completed, namely, the activation of the hourly chimes. He rounded the corner, his golf attire pristine, his clipboard clutched tightly in his hand, his expression a mixture of smug self-satisfaction and general disapproval. And then he saw it. My Big Ben mailbox. He stopped dead in his tracks, his jaw dropping, his eyes widening in a mixture of horror and disbelief. He looked like he'd just stumbled upon an alien spaceship landing in my front yard, or perhaps a particularly offensive display of oversized garden gnomes. He took a few tentative steps closer, his head tilted, as if trying to understand what he was seeing. Then, just as he reached maximum proximity, the chimes began. Bong, bong, bong. The deep, resonant sound echoed through the quiet morning air, a sonic boom of defiance. And Harry snapped. This is an abomination!" he shrieked, his voice reaching a pitch that could shatter glass and probably set off car alarms. He stormed towards my house, his fists clenched, his clipboard waving wildly in the air. You've turned your front yard into a tourist attraction. It's un-American." I emerged from behind the clock tower, a picture of calm, unruffled composure. "Good morning, Harry," I said, my voice dripping with feigned politeness. "I see you've noticed my new mailbox. What do you think? I was going for a historical yet functional aesthetic." "It's a mailbox?" he roared, his face now a shade of purple that I'd previously only seen on overripe eggplants. "It's a clock tower! A miniature Big Ben! It's preposterous!" "It's a tribute to British architecture, Harry," I corrected him gently. "A celebration of timekeeping. A symbol of— well, I'm not quite sure what it symbolizes, but it's definitely a conversation starter. And," I added, with a pointed look at the functional mail slot at the base, "it's a very convenient way to get my mail. No more porch pirates thanks to Big Ben here." Watching Harry's face contort with rage and disbelief was more satisfying than any on-time package delivery could ever be, I thought, struggling to suppress a laugh. He sputtered, he fumed, he threatened, but it was all for naught. The Big Ben mailbox was here to stay, and Harry Fitzpatrick was powerless to stop it. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph, a victory for creativity, a crushing defeat for the forces of beige conformity. Harry, predictably, called an emergency HOA meeting, demanding the immediate removal of my architectural monstrosity. He envisioned a swift condemnation, a unanimous vote to dismantle my clock tower, a restoration of order and blandness to Harmony Heights. He was, as usual, in for a rude awakening. The meeting, held in the same beige-walled community center room, which I now realized was probably the source of Harry's unwavering commitment to beige, was a scene of utter chaos. Harry, looking increasingly frantic and disheveled, presented a PowerPoint presentation titled, "The Big Ben Blight: Why Oversized Mailboxes Threaten Our Community." The presentation was a masterpiece of fear-mongering and hyperbole, filled with blurry photos of my mailbox, exaggerated claims about its negative impact on property values, and a series of increasingly unlikely scenarios. Slide 1. Structural instability, risk of collapse, with a picture of a cartoon clock tower toppling over. Slide 2. Excessive noise pollution, disrupting the peace and quiet of our community, with a picture of a sound wave labeled "Danger." Slide 3. Attracting undesirable elements, tourists, with a picture of a group of people taking selfies in front of my mailbox. Slide 4. The complete and utter destruction of our neighborhood's aesthetic harmony, with a picture of my Big Ben mailbox next to a picture of a perfectly manicured, utterly boring beige house. His arguments were met with a mixture of skepticism, amusement, and outright hostility. The other HOA members, it turned out, were not as enthusiastic about banning miniature clock towers as Harry had hoped. Some were secretly impressed by my audacity. Others were simply tired of Harry's constant complaining. And a few, I suspected, were secretly hoping I'd offer them a discount on their next Amazon order. While Harry fumed and plotted, the rest of the neighborhood was embracing the Big Ben mailbox with open arms. What had started as a source of curiosity and amusement quickly became a point of local pride, a quirky landmark, a symbol of Harmony Heights' slightly rebellious spirit. Families would stroll by in the evenings, admiring the clock tower, its four faces illuminated against the night sky. Children would point and gasp, imagining it as a real castle, a magical portal to another time and place. Teenagers started using the mailbox as a backdrop for their social media posts, posing in front of it, striking dramatic poses, and generally adding to the growing legend of the Big Ben house. Even the local British expat community got involved. A group of them, dressed in Union Jack attire, showed up one afternoon, claiming they were on a pilgrimage to see the miniature marvel. They posed for photos, sang "God Save the Queen," and even, to my amusement, tried to leave a small bouquet of flowers at the base of the clock tower. I politely informed them that it was, in fact, a functional mailbox. It was a bizarre, unexpected, and utterly delightful turn of events. My act of petty revenge had inadvertently created a community hub, a source of neighborhood pride, and a constant, unavoidable reminder of Harry Fitzpatrick's defeat. Harry, desperate to regain control, tried every trick in the book to force me to remove my Big Ben mailbox. He cited obscure bylaws. He misinterpreted zoning regulations. He even tried to claim that the hourly chimes were a public nuisance and a violation of the neighborhood's noise ordinance. But it was no use. The HOA's lawyer, the long-suffering Mr. Henderson, a recurring character in my suburban battles it seemed, was forced to explain, yet again, that there was nothing they could do. The Big Ben mailbox, he pointed out, was technically a mailbox. And, while certainly unconventional, it met all the requirements for a residential mailbox. It had a slot for mail, it was accessible to the postal carrier, and it was located on my property. There were no rules against clock towers. There were no rules against decorative structures. And there were certainly no rules against building a miniature replica of a famous landmark in your front yard. But, it's Big Ben, Harry sputtered, his voice cracking with desperation. It's absurd. Yes, Mr. Henderson replied with a sigh. It is, but it's also legal. I made sure to repeatedly emphasize the phrases architectural homage and whimsical tribute to British culture whenever an HOA member was within earshot. And then, the final glorious twist. The mayor's office contacted me. They'd seen the online posts, the news reports, and the growing popularity of the Big Ben mailbox, and they loved it. They praised my creativity, my community spirit, and my unique contribution to the town's architectural landscape. They even suggested adding a small plaque to the mailbox, recognizing it as a local landmark. Harry's attempt to use the city as a weapon against me had backfired spectacularly. He'd inadvertently turned my mailbox into a celebrated local attraction, a symbol of civic pride, and a giant, ticking middle finger to his own authority. The downfall of Harold Harry Fitzpatrick III, the self-proclaimed guardian of suburban aesthetics, the terror of oversized mailboxes, was swift and decisive. After the disastrous HOA meeting, the city's endorsement of my architectural masterpiece, and the undeniable popularity of the Big Ben mailbox, he finally cracked. He resigned from the HOA, his letter of resignation a rambling, incoherent mess of accusations, self-pity, and thinly veiled threats. He blamed everyone but himself for his defeat, claiming he was the victim of a coordinated campaign of harassment, a neighborhood-wide conspiracy to undermine his authority, and a general decline in standards of decency and good taste. He even, in a final act of delusional grandeur, referred to himself as a martyr for the cause of suburban uniformity. Nobody bought it. His departure was met with a collective sigh of relief, followed by a, slightly less spontaneous this time, neighborhood celebration, held naturally in the shadow of my towering Big Ben mailbox. The residents of Harmony Heights, freed from his iron grip, rejoiced in their newfound freedom, their right to express their individuality, within reason, of course, without fear of HOA reprisal. Harry's reign of terror was over, his legacy a cautionary tale whispered among the neighbors. My Big Ben mailbox, meanwhile, was thriving. It became a local legend, a quirky landmark, a symbol of the neighborhood's slightly rebellious spirit. People would drive from miles around just to see it, to take pictures, to pose in front of the clock tower and pretend to be tourists in London. It became a popular backdrop for social media posts, graduation photos, and even a few, surprisingly tasteful, engagement announcements. Tourists, actual tourists, started showing up, asking for directions to the Big Ben house and inquiring about its history. Someone, inevitably, created an Instagram page dedicated to the Mailbox, at Big Ben of Harmony Heights. It quickly gained a following, filled with photos of the clock tower from various angles, at different times of day and in all kinds of weather. There were even a few fan-made videos, set to dramatic music showcasing the Mailbox in all its glorious, oversized absurdity. Local businesses started capitalizing on its fame. A nearby bakery created Big Ben brownies, square-shaped pastries decorated with clock faces. A local gift shop started selling miniature Big Ben Mailbox replicas, which, I have to admit, were rather charming. My act of petty revenge had inadvertently created a community hub, a source of neighborhood pride, and a surprisingly effective marketing tool. My act of rebellion inspired others. If I could have a miniature Big Ben, why not other interesting mailboxes? One neighbor installed a miniature version of the local lighthouse. Another opted for a giant pencil. The creativity was wonderful, and Harmony Heights became known for its interesting mailboxes. Harmony Heights HOA became a relaxed shadow of its former self. The rules were relaxed, and new board members were voted in, with a focus on community instead of enforcement. And so I remained the unlikely Time Lord of Harmony Heights, the accidental champion of architectural freedom. My Big Ben mailbox stood as a proud monument to my victory, a constant reminder that even the most powerful HOA could be defeated with a little bit of creativity, a lot of determination, and a ridiculously oversized replica of a famous landmark. It was a warm summer evening. I was sitting on my porch, sipping a cup of appropriately British tea, watching the sun set behind the clock tower, its four faces illuminated against the twilight sky. The hourly chimes rang out, a deep, resonant sound that echoed through the quiet streets. A new neighbor, a young couple who'd just moved in down the street, walked by. "Excuse me," the woman said. "We're new to the neighborhood. We were just wondering, what's the deal with the clock tower?" I smiled. "It's a long story," I said, "but the short version is I had a disagreement with the HOA about a mailbox." They laughed, intrigued. "Well," the man said, "it's certainly unique." "It is," I agreed. "It is." Who knew that a slightly oversized mailbox and a burning desire for revenge could lead to all this? I guess sometimes you just gotta build a miniature Big Ben to find your peace, I thought, as I watched the new neighbors walk away, shaking their heads and chuckling. I raised my teacup in a silent toast. To the Big Ben mailbox of Harmony Heights, may its chimes forever ring, marking the hours, celebrating freedom, and a constant reminder to all future HOA tyrants. Don't mess with a homeowner's right to, well, whatever this is.